So we paid off our 2.375% mortgage 2 years ago, and I'm gonna break down why we did it, what things to consider, and what makes sense maybe for you. So let's go backward in time and realize the rate environment that we were operating in. So rates were really low at the time, and we got a 2.375% fixed rate mortgage on a 15-year loan. Our goal was not to pay it off early until life happened. So around 23 years old, we had a bunch of non-mortgage debt that we paid off, $76,000 in fact. So we got out of debt and we started building our emergency fund and investing a lot of dollars and working our 9-to-5s, but then life happened and I realized I didn't like what I did. It wasn't the worst in the world, but I was a CPA at Deloitte and that wasn't my favorite thing in the world, and I definitely didn't want to be doing that for the next 30 years. So I was figuring out an escape plan. So I interviewed at Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, the Ramsey team even contacted me, and I went through a bunch of different interviews and I kept declining everything as they weren't the right fit for me and I couldn't quite pin exactly what I wanted to do. So I started the Budget Dog account and I started working with individuals one-on-one, and it lit me up every single day. So about a year in, I knew that is what I wanted to do. But I never ran my own business. My entire life I was told to go to college, get a good degree, and then work a 9-to-5 for 40 years in a good career path, which I did, but I didn't want to do that. And so in order for me to take this huge leap of faith and to take a chance on my business, I had to do something drastic, but I didn't know what that was at the time. So we started assessing our financials. We started looking at all the pros and cons of doing different types of avenues. Well, we came to the conclusion that paying off our mortgage might make sense. So we dove into the topic and understood the pros and cons of that. Now, with the interest rate environment where it was, the high yield savings accounts were not 4, 5, 6% as you see today. So you got to remember the rates were much lower back then, and it wasn't as easy as saying 2.375, you can definitely guarantee a better rate than that. At the time, you could not. So therefore, we had no guarantee that we could beat the 2.375. Now with the investments, there was a good likelihood that we were able to beat the 2.375%, or at least you would think so over the long haul. But here is what people didn't consider along this pathway. The timeline in which we would pay this off was at the height of the bull market. And we were able to pay this off in about 1.5 years to about 2 years in total when the market was at all-time highs. And therefore, what we actually did was very strategic. We looked at where the markets were. We did not try to time the market or guess on the market. We were still gonna do this regardless. But if you look backwards, we actually made money on this decision. I know that's hard to believe for all my math nerds out there, but based on the timing when we paid the extra mortgage payment at the top of the market, the return on our money versus the return in the market actually was better based on our timing. And I'll shout out David with Uncommon Yield on Twitter. He actually admitted I won the math game. Even though along this whole entire pathway, he was saying you shouldn't be doing this, and he said I'm a dummy. But he has since admitted to it, and so I want to shout him out especially in this YouTube video, that it ended up working out in our favor. But let's go back a little bit and talk about the reasons as to why I did it. Remember, I was in a job that I wasn't happy with. We had a ton of debt initially, and I realized that this mortgage was 40% of our current expenses. I knew that if we took our cash flow that we were earning from my 9-to-5, my Budget Dog income, and my wife's 9-to-5, and we put everything over and above 20% of our gross income that we were investing during this timeline, we could pay this off in a super fast amount of time. Now, I did not know what the market was gonna do. I did not know it was gonna perfectly crash at the right time in 2022. It did, but I didn't plan on that happening. But what I did do is calculate the opportunity cost loss by putting my money there versus the stock market in the time frame that we were allocating. We came to the conclusion that we would lose $42,000 in total, but we would also gain a lot back that people didn't talk about. We would have 40% of our monthly expenses lowered, which was a huge benefit to the whole entire equation. The biggest piece of this whole conversation though, was because I lowered my expenses and because I lowered my financial risk, this gave me the confidence to take other risk on with quitting my 9-to-5 and leaning into my passion full time, which I did. And at the time, I remember I was on Jesse's podcast of the best interest, and I told him, I don't want to be the guy in 15 years to look back and say, I told you so. But one thing I did warn him on that podcast was the fact of the math was bigger than what was being factored in the equation from everybody externally. Everyone externally saw 2% versus a theoretical 10%, which was not guaranteed in the market at the time. But the math they didn't account for was the confidence aspect that it gave me to leave my 9-to-5 to pursue my passion full time in order to make more money than my 9 to 5 and the math actually work in my favor. And that math equation has worked out since in a huge way for my family. And I'm not gonna get into the exact numbers, but let's just say moving on from my 9 to 5 was the best financial decision I have ever made in my life. And so a lot of people might say, well, the house would make sense to keep and you still could have left your 9 to 5. You didn't need to reduce your expenses that much. Sure, absolutely. But you have to understand you as a person is so much bigger than a spreadsheet. Would that have given me the full confidence to dive in and fully focus? Or would there be something in the back of my mind thinking, I don't know if I could do this, doubt, uncertainty, worry, anxiety around this decision, when all of my focus needed to be on building the business, not thinking about my financials? So for me, it made a lot of sense. Then obviously looking back on the actual math based on the timing of the payoff, it actually worked out in a huge way for us that we weren't even expecting ourselves. We were okay with taking the L there as long as we knew overall with the overall math equation that we factored in with making more income as a result, then we were good with that. But the other big piece of the puzzle that I left out entirely was my daughter. So before we paid this off, my daughter was on her way. She was not here at that time. And I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad while running my business with her. Now life has changed quite a bit since we've actually had her, again, factoring into the best decision of my life. And I'll give you a little breakdown of what actually has happened since. So my daughter was diagnosed with Dravet syndrome 4 months into her birth. So healthy baby, healthy pregnancy, totally fine the first 4 months. I was staying home, no problem. 4 months, she had her first seizure. And then we found out it was Dravet syndrome, which is a pretty big deal. 1 in 16,000 kids are diagnosed with this, not a sob story. My point is, I could no longer run my business and be a stay-at-home dad with a special needs baby, which is a whole different story than a regular baby. So the next move we had to make was not only get myself out of the 9 to 5, but get my wife out of her 9 to 5 so that she could stay home with Logan full time. The other thing we figured out was the specialist that she needed was not where we lived. It was in Dallas, Texas. And so we knew we had to move. We had to get my wife out of her 9 to 5, and we had to make sure we moved across the country to Texas. That was gonna require flexibility, work relocation, and a lot of money. So because we paid off our house and we had a fully paid for asset, what we could do, we could buy a house very similar in pricing and we could transfer equity from one house to the other, not to mention because my wife was able to quit her job eventually, because of the budget dog income that it provides us, she was able to quit and then also move across the country without work relocation, without worrying about a boss or worrying about anything. A lot of this stuff isn't talked about in the whole Twitter financial world where they talk about just a spreadsheet. This is real life. I talked about it when I paid it off, that there's more to the story than just math, but now watching my story and seeing that I paid this off and seeing the hand that we've been dealt, we've been able to overcome so much because of the decision to pay this house off early. So was the math decision the best to begin with? Not necessarily, although I told people I believe in my confidence and my ability that eventually it would make sense because of the income I generated from this new business and this venture. But at the time, there was no way to prove that. But at this point in time, in this juncture, it is provable. And the other part of the equation is time. The ability to not have a boss, not have a work schedule, not have somebody breathing over your back, and being able to do what you want when you want, and having my wife being able to stay home with my daughter full time to make sure she has the proper care and nutrition is substantial. And not to get into too much detail, but the amount of therapies that come in home, or she has to drive to, or the medications that she has to have on an hourly basis precisely, or bad things can happen, is super important. She is not able to go to school or daycare or anything like that, or it would be a disaster. And I can't even imagine what would be the case if we had to go that route. And of course, Dravet syndrome is a lifelong thing and it will humble you, and there's a lot of different things that could go wrong down the road. But what we want to do is be as proactive as possible so we don't run into this issue down the road. And we know that we're putting all of our effort and proactiveness towards a solution for my daughter. So a lot of people, when I post online, will jump at the fact that I paid off my mortgage that was 2.375%, and it would say it's a stupid decision without actually understanding the real life implications of what actually happened after the fact and things I told them before. Did I know that we're gonna have a child diagnosed with Dravet syndrome? Absolutely not. Did I know life was gonna happen to us in some sort of way to where the security of a paid off house would be a huge asset? 100%. So that gets me to my point about today, current in 2023, where rates are and how I would adjust my decision at this point in time. So high yield savings account, like I inferred in the beginning of the video, are fixed above low interest rates like a 3% or 2.375% like we had. So therefore, if I was making the decision today, what I would be doing is guaranteeing if I wanted to pay off my house, I would actually put the money allocated towards that home down payment in a high yield savings account to guarantee a fixed rate a little higher than the 2.375 that I was locked into, and eventually have the intention of taking that money once it grows within time to then pay off my mortgage. So I would get a better bang for my buck, and I would guarantee a slightly higher rate. Again, when I did this, the rates were not at the same level, so it was a whole different story. And stock market returns were theoretical in nature, and they were not guarantees. And this video is not intended to promote for you to pay off your house. Everybody's situation is going to be different. And in fact, a lot of people I work with, I would say there's no chance in hell I would pay off a mortgage right now. It's definitely a priority thing. Obviously, I had a lot of things in order to be able to even make this decision or have this as an option. We had our emergency fund. We were investing at least 20% of our gross income into retirement. We had no debt. We had all the things that we needed to check before we actually had this decision. And we were young with solid investments on our side to accomplish the goals that we were trying to accomplish. Everybody's goals are different. Start out with your goals and backtrack into the financial decisions that you're gonna make. So I hope that video was helpful. I hope it explains why I actually went into paying off my mortgage in a 2.375% rate, and also why you might want to consider this decision. But again, this is not advice. This is not promotion to pay off a house. This is just insight into what we did and how it actually played out real time. So with that being said, I will talk to you guys next Monday.